The air reeked of expensive bourbon and fragile egos. I stood near the back of the ballroom, half-shadowed by a velvet curtain, dressed in my Air Force Service blues. Not because I wanted attention, but because I didn't want to disappear entirely. My name is Harper Wells, and I've spent the last decade learning how to survive in places where no one cared who I was, only whether I could save a life under fire. But nothing prepared me for surviving this room. It was my father's annual political fundraiser, held at the Capitol Hill Country Club, a polished cage filled with men who'd never seen war, but talked strategy like it was poker. My father, Senator Gregory Wells, made his rounds like a king among pawns. When he passed me, he gave a brief nod. Not fatherly, not warm, just political, as if acknowledging the existence of someone who'd once embarrassed him. Then I heard my cousin Miles speaking just loud enough to sting. "She's just a medic," he said, smirking to a woman in pearls. "Blue collar and uniform." The words landed like a slap. My father heard it. He didn't flinch. Just smiled that weak, complicit smile that said, "Let it go." I almost did. I almost left. But that's when the doors opened, and everything changed. The crowd turned expecting a CEO or senator. Instead, they saw the President of the United States. And he wasn't looking at my father. He was looking straight at me. Is that her? Is that Major Wells? To understand the look on my father's face when the president called my name, you'd have to understand the world he built and the sun he built it around. My older brother, Bradley Wells, was everything my parents ever wanted in a child. Valedictorian, law school at Yale, junior partner at a firm with gold-embossed letterhead. They used to say he was going places like success was a location you could book a first-class flight to. Every family photo had him front and center, smiling like he already owned the future. And in some ways he did. I wasn't the disappointment. I was the inconvenience. The stray thought. The child who didn't fit the script. At Bradley's law school graduation party, I remember standing near the hedges, holding a warm soda, watching strangers toast him like he'd won a war. A string quartet played under a silk tent. My father gave a booming speech about legacy ambition lineage. Then, with dramatic flair, he led everyone to the driveway, where a new black BMW gleamed under a red ribbon. "A man of his stature," he declared, "ought to arrive like one." People clapped. My mother dabbed her eyes. My brother beamed. I thought of the second-hand laptop I was still paying off in monthly installments, the used boots I wore to ROTC, the time I pawned my only good watch to afford a combat medical textbook. A year earlier, when I told them I wasn't going to attend the university they'd pre-selected for me, my mother had dropped her fork mid-bite. My father asked me flatly if I was pregnant. When I said I was enlisting, his face turned to stone. "Enlisting," he said. "Harper, are you hearing yourself? I want to become a pararescue man," I told them. "You mean a battlefield nurse," he corrected, his voice lined with contempt. I looked straight at him. "I mean a combat medic who jumps out of planes, survives behind enemy lines, and saves lives while being shot at." My mother nearly choked on her wine. "That's not who we raised you to be." That was the point, wasn't it? In our family, everything had a place. And people like me who didn't shine the way they expected were quietly boxed away. From that day forward, the space between us became an unspoken agreement. They sent cards on holidays, signed only with their names, not love. I stopped trying to explain what I did. They stopped asking. At family dinners, Bradley always sat in the center seat. I sat at the edge, smiling politely, waiting for a subject change. They didn't hate me. That would have required more effort. They simply didn't see me. But I saw everything. And standing there in that ballroom, just moments after the president spoke my name aloud, I knew the life my father had constructed around Bradley, around image, around control, was about to split down the middle. 2 years before that ballroom, I had earned something I never thought I'd even survive to reach promotion to technical sergeant. It had taken me 8 grueling years of deployments, night ops, rescue dives, and battlefield trauma rotations to get there. Every stripe on my sleeve came with a scar. And for once, I wanted to share it. I called them 3 weeks before the pin-on ceremony. My voice shook slightly, half from the excitement, half from the fear of being dismissed again. "Dad, I said they're promoting me next month. It's on base open to families. I'd really like it if you and Mom could be there." There was a pause, the kind that always came when the subject shifted away from Bradley. "Well, he said we'll check the calendar. You know how things are around here." I waited. A week before the ceremony, no reply. 3 days before, still nothing. Then, the night before, my phone finally lit up. It was Mom. Her voice had that careful, performative gentleness, like she was preparing to hand me bad news wrapped in gift paper. "Harper, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. We really wanted to come, but something's come up. I didn't say anything." She continued, "Your brother. He didn't make partner. He's taking it very hard. We're flying to New York to be with him. He just really needs us right now." I didn't remember hanging up. I just remembered standing in my barracks room, the fluorescent light flickering above me, staring at the single ribbon box I had placed on the desk. They had canceled me. Again. This time for a title he didn't get. That morning, I pinned on the new stripes myself. A fellow airman offered to take a photo. I said no. Somehow it felt worse to commemorate a moment no one cared to witness. Later that week, my dad sent a single-line email. "Congratulations. We're sure you'll continue doing well." No call, no visit, no mention of the ceremony. I remember sitting in the empty mess hall that evening, watching the clock tick past 2100. My tray still had half a sandwich untouched. I felt not sad, not angry, just scraped clean, like someone had emptied out the center of me and left the shell standing. It wasn't that they didn't come. It was that they never even considered why it might matter. To them, I was the background, and the background doesn't get a spotlight. But in that quiet moment, I made a promise. If I was ever going to be seen, truly seen, it wouldn't be because I begged for it. It would be because the world left them no other choice. The moment the president walked into that ballroom, the atmosphere changed, like someone had sucked the oxygen out of it. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze mid-air. Even my father, who once prided himself on shaking hands with 4 former presidents, straightened his tie like he was prepping for a royal visit. But the president didn't look at him. He didn't look at the senators or billionaires or the Wall Street heir my mother had been shamelessly flattering near the bar. He looked at me. His voice cut through the hush like a scalpel. "Is that her? Is that Major Harper Wells?" My father's hand extended for a handshake that never came, just hung there, caught in the air like a failed performance. My cousin Miles audibly choked on his drink. The woman next to him gasped and stepped back, like she was standing too close to something radioactive. I didn't move. The president walked toward me with purpose, his aides flanking him like shadows. When he reached me, he didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he clasped my shoulder steady and firm. "Major Wells," he said, "thank you for being here tonight. I've been meaning to meet you personally." I managed a respectful nod. "Sir," I said, keeping my voice calm, despite the tremor beneath my ribs. He turned to one of his aides, who stepped forward and introduced himself quietly. "Major Wells," the man said, "the president would like to extend an official invitation for you to attend a private ceremony next week at the White House. He would like to award you the Distinguished Service Cross for your actions during Operation Winterlight." My blood turned cold. Operation Winterlight was classified so deeply, I wasn't sure I was even allowed to think about it. A failed extraction in the Northern Highlands, a downed Black Hawk, 3 KIA, 1 CIA asset retrieved alive, 1 medic me who refused to leave the wounded behind. I nodded once. The aide lowered his voice. The president was fully briefed. "Your leadership during the crisis. It was exceptional." I stood perfectly still as the ballroom buzzed again, low voices, confused stares, my father trying to smile like he was somehow involved. Then I made a decision. It came to me, cold and clear, like an ice cube down the spine. I looked the aide in the eye. "Would it be possible for my family to attend the ceremony?" I asked. He tilted his head, slightly studying me. "Of course, Major. We'd be honored to host them." He meant it as kindness, but for me, it was strategy. This wasn't about recognition anymore. This was about confrontation, served in full dress beneath the chandeliers of a house they revered more than the daughter they had ignored. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and reverence. It was one of the smaller briefing suites in the West Wing, intimate, heavy with history, and just large enough to feel claustrophobic when truth decided to settle in. A presidential aide had met me outside and walked me in. My family was already seated. They hadn't known I was coming. I saw it in the way my father immediately adjusted his posture, how my mother's eyes flicked to my uniform like it was an outfit she couldn't quite remember buying. Miles gave a twitch of a smile, unsure whether he was supposed to be impressed or threatened, and Bradley, my brother, offered that same lopsided smirk he'd worn since middle school debate. He leaned in just enough to mutter, "Guess your little hobby finally paid off." I didn't respond. I simply took the seat the aide gestured toward across from them, facing forward, and waited. Moments later, the doors opened again. This time, it wasn't an aide. It was the president. He walked in without announcement, without entourage, just presence, the kind that made even the most self-important men in the room unconsciously rise to their feet. But he didn't look at them. He walked directly to me. "Major Wells," he said, warm but resolute, "I'm honored you accepted our invitation." "Yes, sir," I replied evenly. He turned to my family. "I asked all of you here because I believe there's something you deserve to understand, something most families never get to hear." They froze, expressions politely blank, like people bracing for a story that might exclude them. Then he began. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't embellish. He simply told the truth. About Operation Winterlight. About a failed extraction in hostile territory. A helicopter torn apart by ground fire. 3 lives lost within the first 15 minutes. A mission gone sideways in a remote mountain range with no name. And then about me. About how I, already wounded, had crawled through the debris to find the one surviving intelligence officer. How I set a collapsed lung using a needle and a flashlight held between my teeth. How I coordinated air cover using a damaged satellite radio and set perimeter flares while fending off advancing hostiles for nearly 6 hours. How I kept that man alive, his ribs broken, his blood pressure, crashing by whispering stories, and applying pressure with bare hands when all the gauze ran out. When he finished, the room was silent. The president turned to my father. "Senator Wells," he said, "you may not have known the full extent of your daughter's service, but let me assure you she didn't just serve. She saved this nation from a diplomatic catastrophe. She led, she endured, and she exemplified what this country should be proud of." Then he looked at me. "Major," he asked, "is there anything you'd like to add?" I turned my gaze toward my family, 4 faces I knew better than they ever knew me. My voice was steady. "No, sir," I said. "I was just doing my job." No one spoke for the first 10 minutes of the car ride. The silence wasn't awkward, it was oppressive, like fog that had weight. I sat behind the driver, staring out at the streets of D.C. as we rolled past monuments and memories lights reflecting in the tinted windows like ghosts. My mother finally broke the silence. Her voice was thin, almost childlike. "Harper, we're so proud of you." I didn't turn around. From the passenger seat, my father added truly, "That was incredible." I kept my eyes on the reflection of the Capitol dome shrinking in the glass. Bradley shifted beside me. I could feel his discomfort radiating. But he didn't speak. Neither did Miles. They sat like statues carved from embarrassment. They weren't offering me pride. They were offering themselves a lifeline. I didn't take it, because it was never really about me, not before, and certainly not now. It was about reconciling the narrative, reframing me in their minds as something they could explain at parties. I didn't answer, didn't nod, didn't smile. Eventually, my mother tried again. "I wish we had known sooner about what you'd done." I almost laughed, but it came out as a breath. "You never asked." That shut them up. When we reached their hotel, the car stopped. The driver looked at me in the mirror, waiting. I nodded slightly. They took the cue. My parents stepped out first, murmuring goodbyes with the fragile courtesy of people leaving a wake. Bradley followed, his expression unreadable. Miles was last. He glanced back at me before closing the door as if wanting to say something, but he didn't. The door clicked shut. The silence returned. But this time it felt cleaner. That night in my hotel room, I watched the city lights crawl across the ceiling. The metal sat on the dresser, the velvet box half open. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. They had seen it, heard the story, stood in the room, and for the first time it wasn't about being forgiven or accepted or even acknowledged. It was about being undeniable. A few days later, my phone rang. My mother again. Her voice had returned to that performative normalcy, the tone she used when pretending we were just a regular family. We were thinking, she said, we should throw you a party, a real celebration, invite everyone, maybe even the press, nothing big, just something tasteful. I let her finish. Then I said the words I should have said a decade earlier. No, thank you. She paused. I don't need a party, I added, and I don't need an audience. Before she could pivot into guilt or nostalgia, I said it clean. I have to go now. And I hung up. The line went dead. And for the first time in my life, it felt like peace. Peace didn't arrive with fireworks. It came in smaller moments, the kind most people overlook. A morning run before sunrise, the scrape of boots on gravel. The silence that settles after a trainee's scream fades into determination. A year after the ceremony, I transitioned out of field operations. My knees still ached when the temperature dropped. The scar across my thigh tugged with every shift in weight. But I hadn't retired. Not really. I was stationed at Redstone Training Facility in Arizona, where I now served as an instructor for pararescue candidates. The very same program that had once broken me down and rebuilt me bone by bone. Out here, there were no press releases, no podiums, just sweat dust and the relentless push for better. It suited me. Most days I stayed in the background, watching, correcting, sometimes barking orders when safety demanded it. But every now and then, someone would falter in a way I recognized too well. One afternoon, a candidate barely 20 froze halfway across the suspended rope course, arms shaking, eyes wide. The desert wind made the rope sway harder than usual. He looked down once and stopped moving completely. Other instructors watched in silence, waiting to see if he'd self-correct. I walked to the base of the platform. He saw me coming and looked ashamed already. I can't, he muttered. I can't move. I didn't yell. I didn't coach. I climbed. Side by side, boots scraping rope fingers numb. When I reached him, I didn't offer encouragement. I offered instruction. Forget the end, I said. Just find the next grip. He blinked. That's it. One move, then another. That's all you ever have to do. He nodded slowly, hand trembling as he reached forward. Then again, and again. When he finally made it across, he collapsed into the dirt, laughing and crying at the same time. I stood at the other end, watching quietly. There was no applause, but there didn't need to be. That night we had a cookout behind the instructor barracks. Nothing fancy. Folding chairs, cheap beer-burnt sausages on foil. We told stories, some true, most exaggerated, and laughed at things civilians would never understand. One of the senior medics slapped my back and said, "Hell of a save up there today." I just shrugged. Wasn't about the rope. He grinned. No, it never is. Later, alone in my bunk, I thought about the medal. It was locked in a drawer. I hadn't touched it in months. But I thought about that kid, his fear, his grit, the way he kept climbing. And I realized something I hadn't put into words until that moment. The world had watched me get a medal once. But out here, I got to give people a reason to believe they could earn one too. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the photo came through. A message from my father. No greeting, no context, just an image. My Distinguished Service Cross perfectly framed in dark walnut and mounted in a spotlighted corner of his office right next to Bradley's law degree. Beneath it, a caption in his familiar formal tone, "The centerpiece of my collection. Everyone is so impressed." I stared at it for a long moment, not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. He still didn't get it. To him, the medal wasn't a story of blood-cold pain or resolve. It wasn't the weight of carrying another man's life through hostile fire. It wasn't the stillness of being forgotten. To him, it was proof he hadn't failed as a father. A conversation piece. A shiny redemption arc he could point to on the wall and say, "That's my daughter," without ever having known what it meant to see me. I didn't reply. I just deleted the message, and with it, the last piece of permission I had ever looked for. That evening, I walked to the edge of the Redstone training field. The sun was setting low, dragging soft orange light across the sand. The wind moved slowly through the tall flags and empty bleachers. At the far end, there was a simple wooden bench bolted into the earth. I sat there with both feet flat on the gravel and my hands resting on my thighs. It was quiet. No cadets, no shouting, no noise but the wind through the course. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who had stood at the edge of every family photo waiting to be noticed, the one who pinned her own stripes in an empty hangar, the one who learned to stop hoping someone would ask her what the mission was. And then I thought about today, about the trainees who whispered, "If she can do it, maybe I can too," about the medic who emailed me to say she made it through a deployment because someone once told her my name, about the young airman who finished the ropes course last week and saluted me like I was the reason he hadn't let go. The medal was still in my drawer, but my legacy was never meant to hang on a wall. It was meant to live in motion, in grit, in sweat, in silence. Legacy is what echoes when the ceremony is over, when no one is clapping, when no one is watching. Just you, the sky, and the purpose you never needed to explain. That's what I carried now. Not anger, not pride, just clarity and peace.